IIMS kind invitation to speak. If you don't mind, I'll just sit and we'll keep it informal. I think I like the tone today. It's informal and I've done so much myself. So thank you very much for still staying on. Insights as to the role of the marine surveyor from a P&I Club perspective. Being a claims director myself, my approach would be from a user, a client, what we see as a claims person is the role of a surveyor in terms of the clubs, both internal club surveyors as well as externally. But before we launch into the presentation proper, just by way of introduction. Right. Yep. So by way of introduction, the Standard Club has been providing mutual third-party liability insurance for over 130 years, and it's one of the 13 international group of P&I clubs around the world. So just to give some sense of proportion, the 13 international group of P&I clubs insure over 95% of the world's commercial tonnage. The Standard Club itself insures about 10% of the world's international ocean-going tonnage. And Standard Asia, which is a subsidiary of Standard Bermuda. So Standard Bermuda is the mother company, and then you have Standard UK, and then Standard Asia. Standard Asia has an entry of about 3% of the world's commercial tonnage. So right here in Singapore, we are the only P&I club incorporated in Singapore. The rest of the clubs are branches of their respective head offices abroad. As a mutual P&I insurer, our aim is actually to ensure that the premiums received in this pot is equals to the amount of claims paid out, less the expenses. So this is reflected, our performance in this regard is reflected by something called the combined ratio, which you may be familiar with, some of you may be familiar with. So for 2017, 2018, we did rather well because we were paying a little bit more out of the pot than actually the income that was received. But it's all right because it evens out over the rest of the years. The club is stable, it's S&P rated A strong, and for the last 2 years, we have been giving back premiums of 5% to the membership with 0% general increase. The Standard Asia is made up of 3 classes. So we have P&I, which is the usual indemnities, wreck removals, crew claims, defense, FD&D, and recently, as of 2015, 20th February 2015, we have a 3rd class, which is the Singapore War Risk Mutual, providing cover in respect of war risk insurance. It's one of the success stories, and it deserves another presentation of its own. But suffice to say, in its 3 years of establishment, it has over 600 vessels entered in this war risk mutual with Standard Asia. Now, in preparing for this talk, preparing for this talk, I came across a snippet as to somewhat related to marine surveying from ancient Greece. Those of you with some background of classical education may recall a chap called Theseus, the mythical king and founder hero of the kingdom of Athens, who slayed the Minotaur, this mythical half man and half beast creature, who lives in the labyrinth in the Isle of Crete, who demanded sacrifices of 7 young maidens and 7 young men annually until that is Theseus killed him. Now the ship which Theseus used for his voyage from Crete to Athens was preserved in the Athenian harbor as a memorial several centuries later after Theseus killed the Minotaur. It had to be maintained seaworthy because it was used as a vessel to take pilgrims to the temple of Apollos annually, and so as parts of the vessel required replacement, it became replaced after ship surveys, no doubt, periodically. And so the question then arises as to, after several centuries, is the ship of Theseus still a ship of Theseus? And so we have the paradox of the ship of Theseus paradox. I'm not entirely convinced that's the origins of marine surveying. So I'll turn to the definition of the IIMS as to what is marine surveying. But first question is, who is marine surveyor? As I said, for this afternoon's presentation, I will look at marine surveyors as those surveyors who work within the club and external to the club. And what is marine surveying? If you look at the definition given by IIMS on its website, it's a two-limbed definition. First definition is services in general to maritime and transport organizations. And the second is production of guidance reports for all other bodies related to maritime operations and maritime trade. I'd like to submit that in regards to services rendered to P&I clubs and to our members, the service in general would fall under the first limb, service to maritime and transport organizations. We'll of course note that the definition is wide, and so it goes really beyond just mere report writing. And so then we turn to the question of what is the service rendered? And so this is the content of my presentation this afternoon. It's in three parts. The first part looks at the quality control aspects that surveyors assist clubs with. The second would be with regards to operations and claim surveys, both covered claims and non-covered claims. And hopefully we have some time to look at just one little case study to see how all this fits together. Feel free to stop me at any time to ask questions, or you can leave it to the end. So in terms of quality control, as I say, the formula that we work on is that premiums plus investment income, as managers, we manage this pot of money, should equal the claims and expenses. We're not a profit-making body. And so, very simply, if we can reduce claims, then that will lead to reduced premiums. How do we do that? Maintain the quality and operating standards of the fleet. Just a quick story. So this is not about mythical Athens or Greek history, but the modern P&I clubs are descendants of the old Hull Club of the 19th century. And as I understand, those days, the Hull clubs would work on the same basis as the P&I clubs in terms of mutuals. However, one problem that they had was they didn't have quality controls with regards to the fleet that they had. And so claims were being paid out for rust bucket fleets. And very soon, unsurprisingly, the Hull clubs went out of business and became extinct. Today, thankfully, the P&I clubs maintain the quality control. We have internal surveyors as well as external surveyors. And there are a whole lot of conditions which are imposed by our rules found in something typically like this. I think each club would have their own rules. And the rules would set out conditions of how we maintain the quality of the fleet, which is what we're going to have a quick look at. So hopefully we won't meet the same fate as the Hull clubs. So first role of the marine surveyor in terms of class. Somebody asked me over lunch, says, do you have to, what's the relationship between class and club? And I said, well, if they don't maintain their class or the recommendations of class, then cover becomes compromised or becomes straight away discretionary. Just this concept of discretionary cover. In some clubs within the international group, they would say that if you don't comply with a particular rule or regulation, in this case class, cover is then no longer in place, no longer effective, there's no cover. At the standard club, we say cover is compromised, discretionary, in the sense that it will go before the board. So if you don't comply with class requirement, cover still remains in place, but we as the managers have no authority to pay out on it. We would have to prepare a paper and send it up to the board, who will then decide whether or not this claim is deserving of support and to what extent. The class requirement of class is one, and that's the role of class surveyors in helping us the class. Right? We also have a procedure called the members' risk review, which is really an operational review carried out by our internal surveyors. So they would go down to the member's office and review the whole operations, some sort of virtual cycle, which will then make recommendations to say, right, these are the operational issues that you have, which you need to improve by a certain date at a certain time. Now, the purpose of this visit and the focus of the visit is not really enforcement, but although members do take it seriously, and it's more to come alongside the members as a mutual to tell them, look, these are the ways we think you can improve. And we have members who are small operators right up to the big boys too. So we try to have a level playing field in terms of raising the standards of our membership and to ensure that we have good fleet. So that's one of the provisions that we have. Member risk reviews, that's a shore-based exercise by internal surveyors. We also have ship risk reviews, which the club then appoints external surveyors to carry out on ships. In fact, over 90% of ship risk reviews are carried out by external surveyors. It's not on all our vessels, but it's on a sampling of them, and we'll target those which are older and those which have issues with port state. And one of the issues that we do look at, that there is a panel of usual surveyors that the club uses, and it would be one of the qualities is being able to handle our membership very diplomatically. So in terms of when you go on board and you find issues, I think the membership will then say, all right, this surveyors, at least they're there to help rather than go and be rather officious and give them a hard time. So that's that sort of balance and working within the club. So these are the SRR areas that's being inspected. That we have that. And again, what happens if there have been occasions where the members refuse to provide or make available their vessels for inspection, or if they do, they don't quite follow the recommendations that the club has made. And so then again, we use our stick, which is cover then becomes compromise, or cover is discretionary. Or if it's a new application, we just refuse to accept the vessel. What are the other functions of our internal loss prevention team? They do work quite a little bit on improving the loss prevention measures of the membership and in the industry. So members of our loss prevention team sits on the P&I, Intertanko, Intercargo, BIMCO. One of the latest initiatives is the Cyber Aware at Sea. There's a wonderful video that you can find at the website there, and it really just shows how doing something simple as charging your phone on the EGDIS system can lead to cyber issues and corruption, your system being corrupted, and cyber security being breached. That's the message that's going out to membership. We participate in together with other bodies, the human element and how fatigue affects conduct at sea and how it leads to claims. We conduct medical pre-employment medical examination schemes, and this is particularly so in Philippines, where a number of our members crew come from, and we look at the schemes to see how could it be that certain medical conditions could be detected before the crew come on board, or what are the issues that we can look at. For instance, could be something as simple as just taking on board sufficient amount of medication for the entire voyage. These are issues that our team looks at. There's of course the newsletter, guides, and DVDs, which are available on our website for free. Another initiative of our internal loss prevention team is that we have formed since 1992 a Safety and Loss Advisory Committee. I've explained the concept of discretionary claims. Some of the discretionary claims may arise because it involves something technical. Most of our board members may not be seagoing people. They may be managers, great experience, but they're not seagoing people. And so sometimes technical issues will be referred to this Safety and Loss Advisory Committee to review, debate, and then put a recommendation to the board to say, in our view, such and such member was acting reasonably or not reasonably, or to the extent somewhat reasonably. The decision, of course, whether or not to extend club cover rests solely and remains with the board, but the advisory committee would work together with our loss prevention team to put a recommendation paper. Other issues which are also discussed by the SLAC committee would be things, new threats like cyber would be one. They look at issues. Why are we having issues as to collisions at this area? And in one case, we found that the charts, the Admiralty charts, needed updating, and so we escalate these matters to the right bodies, and we get the top loss prevention people from our membership who will sit on this committee, people with vast experience at sea, then give their 2 cents worth and collaborate. So it's really free advice and good stuff that they do. So really, the loss prevention team, internal surveyors, they support the claims people like myself. So I sit very close to the loss prevention team, and I'm not a seagoing person, obviously, but I could always reach out to the loss prevention team and say, could you explain what's actually happening here? Then I could translate that, what does that mean legally in those terms. Similarly, for the underwriting team, they look to the loss prevention team, the internal surveyors, to say, look, in your assessment of this vessel, this member, do you think it's a high-risk exposure? And if so, what are the factors that we could take into account to mitigate this risk? And they have, in fact, our loss prevention team come up with a pricing tool called, interestingly, DRAS. So you have a desktop risk assessment tool, which will actually look at 12 different criteria, including things like type, age of vessel, its trading areas, type of cargoes carried, classification society crews, and they'll give little points to this member or this ship, and it's from 0 to 4. So 4 is very good, and 0 is not very good. And this tool will then work with the pricing tool of the underwriters to say, right, based on these criteria that we have, the rating should be such and such, and that's the role our internal surveyors perform in the club. As you know, we are one of the 13 P&I, one of the 13 IG membership members within the international group of P&I clubs. Within the 13, this group of 13 international group of P&I clubs, there is something called the pooling agreement. So the way it works is that the first 10 million of any claims or liability rests with the particular club. So let's say we have an incident, first 10 million will fall within that particular club. Above 10 million, there is a pooling arrangement amongst the 13 clubs up to $7.7 billion worth of liability through a mechanism of 13 clubs pooling their resources together and reinsurance contracts. So there is an interest, not just within the standard club, but within the entire IG group to maintain the quality of the fleet. And so within the pooling agreement, it states that where a ship or a member is in decline entry, and it then is entered with another club, the old club or the existing original association would have the right to nominate that vessel to be inspected, whether or not it qualifies as a designated vessel. And there's a designated vessel criteria within the pooling agreement. So if that vessel then fails to meet the criteria that it's supposed to meet, very minimal, then it will be a designated vessel. Now, what is the implication of being a designated vessel? It would mean that the new club would then, instead of retaining $10 million worth of liability, would now have to retain $20 million worth of liability in respect of this vessel that it wants to keep, retain within its membership. Then the pooling agreement goes on to say, look, if this same vessel, after a year, carries on to be a designated vessel, even after a redetermination, so there's another inspection, which would probably be carried out by an external surveyor, then it becomes a prescribed vessel. At that point, it loses pooling cover. So all that vessel would have within the new association is just $10 million, and that's it. So the pooling, the other P&I clubs just washes its hands of this vessel. And that's how, one way that the P&I clubs maintain its the quality of the fleet generally. And that's a role for external surveyors. So now we move on to operations and claims, the role of surveyors in terms of operations and claims. I like to think of the role of the club somewhat like a Houston control center or the hub on the wheel of a bicycle. We coordinate what happens. So you have an incident, and then it gets reported to the club. The club will look at it, and it could be somewhere around the other side of the world where our members' vessel trade. And we appoint correspondents. Correspondents then put us in touch with surveyors, lawyers, and it's a 24-hour emergency center. So that's the role of the club, apart from advising on safety and laws and paying out claims. What are the risks that are covered by the P&I Club? So these are the usual P&I cover, and it also includes FD&D. So FD&D, defense cover, will cover disputes in respect of charter parties or bills of lading. But more often than not, our members, because we're a mutual and non-profit, our members expect us to assist even where matters don't strictly fall within P&I or FD&D cover. So for instance, they say, oh, we're going to Africa and we've got sugar bags, bags of sugar which are going to be unloaded, and we know it's a difficult port. Can you arrange for surveyors to attend? Say, yes, we could, but you have to know these are operational expenses, so we will put you in touch with the reputable surveyor, but cost would be, fees would be members' expense. So we assist in terms which are issues which are non-covered, or they may have preloading steel surveys to be carried out, and that will also sometimes be to members' account. So we move on to the issue as to what about covered claims. Now, as a claims person, I'm generalizing. The life of a claim would probably be a bit like biology. There's some biology to it takes on a life of its own, as they say. You have a birth, childhood, adulthood, and death. And the timelines are just suggestions, but they're quite typical of what, except maybe in some other jurisdiction, maybe in South Asia, it takes about 10, 20 years for cases to resolve. But by and large, those would be sort of the life cycle of a claim. But then, for the purposes of this afternoon, we ask, what is the role of the surveyor vis-a-vis each of these stages of the development and the life cycle of a claim? So when I talk of birth, I would be referring to claim notification, initial handling, childhood, dealing with the immediate issues. So it's like the child, it still requires lots of attention. And then adulthood, what are the legal, what are the technical issues that we're looking at, and resolution of claims. So let's look first at the pre-incident bit. I was very encouraged to hear Mike mention about accreditation, and I hear bandied about quite a lot words like accredited, certified, qualified surveyors, and yet I understand there is no one body to actually stamp or say, right, you're certified surveyors. In respect of how clubs appoint surveyors, I'll be very frank, and what we do is we occasionally get requests, can we appoint this surveyor because they are cheaper also, and the clubs rely heavily on our correspondents. So our correspondents are our ears and our eyes on the ground at local local ports, which we can't have offices at every port in the world, but we have correspondents at almost all the major ports in the world, and we'll pick up the phone and say, right, what do you know of this? Can we use them? And they'll say, right, okay, they're all right, or they're only okay for smaller matters or that sort of thing. Or they'll say, no, please don't touch them with a barge pole. And then we'll go on the advice of the correspondents. Expertise, as also discussed this morning, some surveyors, I mean, as you saw the list of P&I cover, is a very wide range, and you can't expect any one person to be an expert in all these areas. And of course, it helps if your firm of surveyors that would have various people who could handle various issues, and that's great. But I think it's always great to exercise caution when you pull yourself out as an expert in a particular area, particularly where there are high stakes and litigation involved. I myself have been involved in litigation with an expert said, you've got this and that, and under cross-examination, the whole thing just crumbled. And that's really not very nice. Of course, now we're into cost efficiency, as Mike Mead mentioned today. It's all about cost efficiency and SLA service levels agreement. Our membership pushes us to say, right, what deals can you get? How can you get us value for money for our premiums? And we say, right, would surveyors be willing to offer some value-added service? For instance, if you're servicing a particular jurisdiction, what are the quirks of that jurisdiction? What are the the precautions that our membership take. These are things like free advice you could give out, either publish on your website, or when you come around town, give us a talk about what's the latest interesting issues within your jurisdiction. As I say, the clubs can't be in each of these jurisdictions, and we rely on our correspondent, but our correspondent also can assist only so much. So if you can add that value-added service, this would be great. Right, so we've covered the operational surveys, which may or may not be to the member's account. So we make it clear upfront, look, these are operational issues, it's not covered by the club. It's up to you, surveyors, whether or not you want to ask for payment upfront, or whether you would like to say, right, okay, because we trust this particular member, we will do the job and then bill later. So, but we, the club, will make it clear, or should make it clear upfront. This is within cover, this is not within cover, so fees, who's going to pay the fees? But sometimes, it may be that there is that urgency. Now, first 5 hours, right? So we look, what is the scope of instructions? I would think from a club's perspective, I think what we would like our surveyors to be clear on is what is the scope of the instructions? What is the purpose? If you have a collision, are your instructions to go to both vessels or just one vessel? As a P&I club, we cover liability in respect of only the claim from the other vessel. We don't cover the claim from your own vessel. But sometimes we would want you to conduct a survey on